this team definitely has the potential to absolutely ruin Lando Norris's chance at winning his first championship, and vice versa, at ruining Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri's chances. Welcome back, F1 fans, to the channel for another week of predictions slash previews for the Qatar Grand Prix. And to all the McLaren fans out there, firstly, I hope the pain of the double DSQ has subsided a little bit. I know it's still quite fresh, having it being a triple header, but hopefully you guys are motivated going into this weekend. And then Max Verstappen fans, I'm sure you're loving life right now, as you should be, with him being back in the championship fight. And then I suppose Ferrari fans, I'm sure you guys are still kind of wallowing in your misery, but are we really surprised here? I don't think so. But yeah, we'll dive straight into sort of what I am expecting from Qatar this week and this year. And firstly, there's the rule that, in case you haven't heard, the FIA are enforcing set strategies, not like the exact time that they have to pit, but I believe each compound of tyre can only do a maximum of 25 laps, which means, just from the basic mathematics of how many laps there are in the race, it means it's a mandatory two-stop due to the complete heat, the very high tyre degradation at Qatar, and also just the nature of, even though they have changed the curbs a bit, I do believe the curbs are quite abrasive at Qatar. So that's why they've introduced this rule. I think it was either last year or the year before that they also introduced this after they had loads of tyre failures in practice. So I think that's going to make it a really interesting race, actually, because in this sort of dirty air formula era, you just look at this track layout and it doesn't offer much hope for good racing, because it is a bike track, realistically, and F1 just happens to race here. And it's just, without differing strategies, I would not see any sort of like massive overtaking here. So I'm glad that they've introduced this. I don't think they've purely introduced it to make the racing better. I do think it's mostly a safety a safety precaution, but I'm glad that it's going to spice things up in that sense. And especially given that the top three in the championship are so close now, it means we'll probably see a really, really good race between those three. Maybe not Piastri because it's been a bit off form, but I do think we're in for a real banger between Verstappen and Norris at least. So it is worth touching on, obviously, the drama, the controversy, which is still very fresh from Las Vegas, with the disqualification of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, which I think it is important to question whether this will affect them going into Qatar too, because obviously everything's kept behind closed doors. We don't know exactly whether McLaren was just pushing it a bit too far, or if the new sort of testing standards by the FIA has caught McLaren out and they've been doing this for a while. We don't know. But I think the important thing is that it should be factored in that it could have an effect on McLaren's performance this weekend, because a lot of people are hyping up McLaren to be very strong at Qatar, and you would expect them to be. But if this skidware issue is what it is, like if it persists to this weekend, I think McLaren, and especially Lando Norris, the championship leader, could be in a bit of trouble from Max Verstappen, who of course won the Qatar Grand Prix last year, and I believe sealed the championship last year as well at Qatar. So it's going to be a real interesting one from that perspective. But what I don't see getting talked about enough, because of the hype of Max Verstappen, being back within a race win of Lando Norris, what isn't getting enough press, I'd say, is the fact that it isn't out of the realms of possibility that Lando Norris just casually wins the championship this week. Because all he needs to do is outscore Max and Oscar by 2 points, and he wins the championship. Done and that simple. Like, it's quite obviously it sounds easy on paper, just scoring 2 points, and it probably won't shape up like this. But I do think it is kind of flying under the radar that this is very much a match point championship deciding race, in the sense that just a tiny bit of misfortune for the other two drivers, and Lando's going to be a first-time world champion. So that is going to also make the fact that this is a sprint weekend very, very, very interesting, and any sort of misfortune for Max or Oscar is going to be devastating in the context of the championship. And I think it's worth also sort of talking about other factors that could come into this championship fight, because that is the big talking point right now. And I do believe that the main team or the main people to look out for is Mercedes, which back in the midpoint of the season, you'd just say George Russell. But now, especially after Las Vegas and Brazil, you have to include Kimi Antonelli in part of that. And you have to say, this team definitely has the potential to absolutely ruin Lando Norris's chance at winning his first championship, and vice versa, at ruining Max Verstappen and Oscar Piastri's chances. And I think it's definitely something to look out for, because, again, looking at last year, George Russell, he didn't take pole, but he started on pole for this race. And the Mercedes, even though these hot conditions you wouldn't think it suits Mercedes, you have to remember that George Russell won in Singapore this year. So I think Mercedes are definitely a contender for being competitive. However, a team that I don't think is going to get in the mix for this championship fight is Ferrari, unfortunately. I don't know. It's just something about the mandated tyre strategies and the hot conditions and a very strategic race. I just see this going absolutely terribly for Ferrari, if I'm honest. To the extent where, it's going to be potentially their worst weekend of the year. Discounting China, where they both got disqualified. I mean actual performance. So that's something to look out for. And then, of course, you've also got the battle in the midfield with the battle between Haas, Aston Martin and Racing Bulls and Sauber. They're all still very close in the championship. And, of course, last year, it was notable that Guan Yu Zhou managed to score Sauber's first points, I believe, for the whole season at Qatar. So if we're going off of historic form, you could suggest that Sauber might be a competitor here, potentially even top 10 candidates. But also, I do believe Aston Martin could be a team to look out for, just in the sense that most of the track is high downforce. The drag poor qualities of the Aston Martin are kind of negated in the fact that if they qualify well, they should be fine. I think Aston Martin will struggle if they have to go through the pack. But if they get a good qualifying, I do think Aston Martin will be in contention for the best midfield team. And I do think Williams won't be great here this weekend, just off of last year. I think it was Alex Albon had an absolute stinker here last year. I might be wrong, but I think he did. But yeah, that's kind of my overall thoughts for like what to watch for the teams for this weekend. And I'd guess we just dive straight into my top five predictions, starting with the sprint qualifying, because as I said earlier, of course, it's a sprint weekend. And my top five goes as Kimi Antonelli, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, George Russell, and Max Verstappen. Not too much to talk about here, so I'll just move straight on to the sprint race predictions, which starts with Lando Norris in fifth, Kimi Antonelli, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, and Max Verstappen wins from pole position. And notably for the championship here, both title contenders to Norris gain on him, as per my predictions. So that's something to look out for if this does come true. Which, look, last week I got all 5 race predictions right. So, yes, I've got nothing to base this off, but I've got good vibes behind me. So that's enough. That's enough for me. And then we move on to my top 5 qualifying predictions, starting with George Russell, Lando Norris, Kimi Antonelli, Max Verstappen, and surprisingly to a lot of people, I reckon, Oscar Piastri will take a pole position. And part of that is kind of down to he has been quite good here for the past 2 years, has Oscar Piastri. So that's kind of why I'm weighing him up to beating Lando Norris this weekend, which is definitely a bold prediction based off of his recent performance, but that's what I reckon. And then we move into the race predictions, where it starts with Charles Leclerc in 5th, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Kimi Antonelli, and Max Verstappen wins the main race, which for the championship, I believe, he gains 13 points here. I think I had 4 points in the sprint race. So Max Verstappen would go into Abu Dhabi 7 points behind Lando Norris, which would make it a race win and second place as a difference between the two drivers. And I think it would be... the countback wouldn't be a difference if Max Verstappen won. I think if Max won, he'd win it. So that's my predictions. Again, Oscar Piastri ahead of Lando Norris too. And I've given a bit of mercy to Ferrari in the sense that you get your Charles Leclerc in P5 here. That's as generous as I'll be, and it's probably way too optimistic anyways. So that's my race predictions, or my predictions in general. And then moves on to my stroll of the week, as per usual, where Las Vegas was so promising, you know? Like, I know I predicted him poorly, which I think most people would, so I'm not gonna beat myself up on that. But the qualifying session, lots and lots of potential, and then just completely demolished by Gabriel Bortoleto in the race. So all of that, you'd probably be thinking, oh, maybe there's a bit of optimism for Lance Stroll. And I did also say earlier that I think Aston Martin will be good here. So that's exactly why I have predicted him 18th in qualifying and 16th in main qualifying. So very, very low expectations for Stroll from me. And unfortunately, it doesn't get much better for my predictions for the race, where he'll finish 16th in the sprint and 14th in the main race, gaining 2 positions in each, respectively. So yeah, I do think this will be a bit of a Fernando Alonso carrying weekend. I mean, when is it not? I mean, pretty much every weekend, but anyways, I think Stroll's not going to have a great one here. I think last year, it was the race where he just randomly beat up his performance engineer or whoever that was. So doesn't have a great history here, does Lance. So I think the performance will reflect that, unfortunately. And then lastly, I'll move on to my general prediction of the week. And that is the championship lead is less than 15 points. And I know I've got a picture of Max Verstappen here, but I'm not stupid. I will hedge my bets at any opportunity. That's why I've left it vague. Maybe Oscar Piastri goes on a crazy race and he's the one within 15 points. I'm not going to be picky. Less than 15 points is less than 15 points. I don't care who. But I'm hopeful for a close contention for the championship going into Abu Dhabi. And I look forward to it if it does happen. Because I do genuinely believe Max will be strong here this weekend. He'll be extra motivated as well, now that even though he's denied it in the media a lot about his championship chances, I do think when you get within a race win and off the bounce of a race win in Vegas, I do believe Max has to be seriously considering this at this point, and he will be driving like Mexico last year. Like, if he's side by side with Lando, I don't think Lando's staying on the track, if I'm honest. So yeah, hopefully we see that. If not, then I will be very sad. Not that I don't want to see Lando being a champion. It's just that I do genuinely believe of the three contenders, I think Max would deserve it the most. Purely because both McLaren drivers have had many points in the season where they've just shown that they're not championship quality. Whether that's Norris at the beginning of the season or Piastri at this point of the season, they just don't have that consistency, unfortunately. And that's why I do personally want Max Verstappen to win it. And I don't let that bias get in the way of things, but I would like to see that happen, personally. And then, sort of lastly, I will go on to my recap of the average adjusted driver standings based off of their average finishing positions, which again, I say every time, if you don't know what this is based off of, it's not their average positions as those numbers. Just go watch the video featured on my channel that explains what I've done here. But as you can see, Max Verstappen, the most consistent driver of the season after the McLaren shambles last week. So yeah, I think an interesting one to look out for is Antonelli potentially going ahead of Hamilton, because I do think that has a decent chance of happening at this current form. So that would be massively impressive if Antonelli manages to bring that back at the end of this season, and even in the real driver standings comes ahead of Lewis Hamilton, because it will just demonstrate two things. One, Antonelli will end his rookie season very, very strongly, but also will just reinforce how bad Hamilton's season has been. But yeah, that's all I really have to talk about for my Qatar predictions this week. As I said, massively looking forward to it, as I hope all of you are, because any sort of three-way championship fight, even if it's 24 points, even if it's on the margin of it not being a championship fight, I don't care. All it takes is one DNF, just call in the Yuki Tsunoda dive bomb from P20 on the grid, and we're chilling. Like, literally, what more do you want? Plus, Red Bull has two teams. Just get Lawson and Hadjar to do it. I'm sure they want to drive in Red Bull next year. They'll gracefully take the DNF trade deal to get a Red Bull seat next year. So I think it's gonna be spicy, and it's gonna hopefully end the season off with a bang. If not, then I will revert to saying this season has not been very good. It lives and dies off of these last two races. And it's crazy to think that also it's just the last two races of this regulation era. To think that all the way back in 2022, that we had this completely new ground effect philosophy of car, and to think that that's gone now after these two races, it's kind of crazy to think. And just to see the progress of how bad the racing's got across the years, but I won't moan about that. I've done enough of it. So yeah, that's my preview for Qatar. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please remember to like and subscribe if you did enjoy the video. Of course, if you didn't, then feel free, just go away. Like, if you didn't enjoy it, I don't mind. So let me know in the comments if there's any other topics you'd like me to cover. It might be a bit difficult for me to do that at this current point, with it being a triple header. I don't exactly have the time to make another off-topic video, but let me know any suggestions if you do have any. I'm more than happy to have a look at it. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the weekend. I hope it's a good one. See you in the next video.